My story begins in 2001. I was back then in high school, and I wanted to be part of those powerful people, this powerful group that were the webmasters. So I did my research. I went on Google and tried to find how to create websites. And I found the perfect tool for the job, Dreamweaver. I think we've all known that. We are all ashamed, but please be, be kind. But something was missing. It was really easy. I could drag and drop everything I wanted to create my page, but there was missing some interactivity with my web pages. So soon I started to search again how to add like a website, a chat, a new system to my pages. And I found some websites that just said, okay, you can add a chat to your site by adding, just copy-pasting this code inside your markup, just above the body tag. I was like, what is HTML? What is a markup? What is body tag? So back then, it was my first contact with JavaScript. And I think it was pretty harsh. Fortunately, a few years later, in 2009, I came back to JavaScript for another try. And back then, jQuery was rising. So I started to really do some things with JavaScript. It was really easy, just use a selector, and then you can do whatever you want with the DOM, mutating it and modifying what you want to modify. There was a shitload of useful plugins, like this one. I must admit, I overuse this on my website, I'm sorry. And I think if you ask me how I was doing with JavaScript, I felt like a boss. But in fact, I didn't know anything. Fortunately, in 2014, a few years later, I really started to learn JavaScript because I started my internship in my current job, Viseo, and started to learn Node.js, AngularJS, and more importantly, JavaScript. I learned what is a scope, what does this mean, etc. So I started to really love this language because it's a beautiful language. It has its default, but it has survived a lot. Since I've really started to practice JavaScript, it has evolved a lot. I'm not talking about the new version of JavaScript, ES6, ES7, ES8, but just the best practice we've used and the way we are building web application with JavaScript. I want to come back on a few of those changes. The first one that you can notice in my own experience when I went from jQuery to AngularJS, I went from a place where I was just mutating whatever I want to do in an imperative style to a place where I was just describing a state and the changes were made automatically by AngularJS. This is also the case for React and other frameworks. So I really went from an imperative style to a declarative style. This is one of the tendencies of these last years. React went further because it added a virtual DOM between your application and the DOM to minimize the change on the DOM, which are expensive, and calculate the minimum changes needed. This is another tendency we've seen. Now almost every front-end framework use virtual DOM. We've seen the rise of a new kind of data architecture with Flux pattern. In this kind of architecture, the data only flows in one way. That means the store contains the state of our application, and then the view is a function of the store. If the view wants to modify the state, it will have to trigger an event, an action that will go through a dispatcher for the state to be modified. It allows a better understanding of the data flow inside the application, so it's another best practice we've discovered along the road. The imperative to declarative style can also be noticed with functional programming. Here you have some snippet written in an imperative way. I want to get the squares of all those numbers. So what I do is looping over each of my number and calculating the square, pushing it in a new array. With functional programming, I will just create a lambda that explains what I want to do, and then just use the map function to say, okay, use this function on each element of my array. To help with functional programming, we've made some library like Ramda.js, Lodash, or Immutable. Immutable had another concept of immutability. This is another best practice we've discovered these years. Finally, I was talking about ES6 earlier. Of course, it helped a lot by adding a lot of features to the language, but there was another thing that was really important at the time. A new actor came into the market, which was called 625, but you may know it as Babel now. Why is it so important? Because at the time, people accepted to add a build step to their development workflow in order to enjoy the new features of ES6. Before that, instead for CoffeeScript, like 10 people in the world, nobody had a build step inside their dev workflow. For production build, yes, but not for dev. So it's important because it allows some new tools to appear, like TypeScript, that add types, static types to JavaScript, which is another, for me, best practice we've discovered. So what if today we were building a language gathering all these best practices we've discovered in one? So to resume, functional programming, I haven't talked about that, but now we are doing some components in the front end. Immutability, types, virtual DOM, the one-way data flow architecture. Let's add a little bit of happiness in the middle of all that, or as you may call it, developer experience. What could we get? You've guessed, it's Elm. And so I took the highway to Elm. So what is Elm? Elm is a functional language, I've already said that compiles to JavaScript. This is great because it means we can use it everywhere we can use JavaScript. That means everywhere, basically. Elm has a very strong emphasis on simplicity, ease of use, and quality tooling. This is the happiness part I was talking about. The Elm community is really focused on the developer experience. So it's really nice. When you go on the Elm homepage, you have 4 promises. The first one is that you have a full JS interoperability. That means you can communicate with JavaScript and exchange data. This is great because you can introduce progressively Elm into an existing web application, and you can also reuse every existing JavaScript library easily. The second promise is that you have an enforced semantic versioning, or SEMVer. For those who don't know SEMVer, this is a philosophy of versioning used by NPM, for example. If you change something in your code, if it doesn't impact anything, you can upgrade the fixed number, the third one. If you have a new feature that doesn't impact existing features, you should increase the minor number. But if you have a breaking change, you are forced to increase the major version. On paper, this is beautiful. In reality, it is not applied everywhere, so it's not rare to see a build broken by an upgrade. In Elm, this is different because you don't choose your version. The Elm package manager will choose the version for you by analyzing your code, and it knows if you have any breaking change. So this is nice. The third promise is that you have great performance. I don't ask you to believe me. You can go. There are a lot of benchmarks in internet. Here it is compared to Ember, React, Angular 1, and Angular 2. And it's really fast, believe me. And the last one, the most important, no runtime exception. I will repeat that. No runtime exception. You can forget about null as no member function or undefined is not a function. You will never have it again. And we will see how it is possible with Elm. But first, let's see some of the syntax. Can everybody read? Yeah. When you install Helm, you have access to 4 tools. The first one is Helm Make, that allows to build your files into JavaScript. The second one is Helm Package, which is the Helm package manager. The third one is Helm Reactor, that provide a development environment. And the last one is a REPL to execute some code inside the terminal. This is what we will use. So let's see if we have some string. Yeah, of course. First thing we can see, the REPL returns us the return value, and it indicates the types on the right. Here it's a string with an uppercase. Do we have number? Yeah. First difference, you can see it's not an uppercase letter. It's because in Helm you have two kinds of number. You have the float and you have the int. As the compiler doesn't know yet if it's a float or an int, it just say, okay, it's a number. We have some basic operation, of course. Division. We have an integer division. As you can see now, it knows it's an int, so it's okay. Let's try to concatenate to string. Oh. Excuse me. And we are seeing our first error in Helm. I wanted you to see that because errors in Helm are really useful. They are limpid, very precise, so it's really helps to learn Helm. As you can see here, it just say, okay, I was expecting a number, but the left argument is a string. So we can understand that we won't append string with that. But it goes further and says, okay, I think you are trying to append string, so maybe you should use the double plus operator instead of the plus operator. So this is really nice. Let's do that. And it works. Okay, this is a functional language, so let's create a function. I will create a basic sum function that will take two arguments, a and b, and return the sum of them. As you can see, this is really concise. You don't have parentheses or comma. You just add the parameters after a space, and you don't have brackets. You just say it is equals to a plus b. You have the type signature of a function who accepts one number, a second number, and returns the number. It means you can use different types of number. For example, if you're using a float and you're trying to use an integer, you will have an error. And once again, it is really useful because it explains to you that Helm does not automatically convert between int and float, but you can use those functions to do that. And it also say, okay, I check first the left side, so maybe this was correct, but the error is on the left side anyway. So it's really like a teacher for you, or like a best friend. Okay. Do we have a condition? Yes. Else for. And as you can see, a condition returns the value because it's an expression and not a statement. It means you can use it like that. For example, if we create an abs function that will return the absolute value of a number x, you can say if x is below 0, then return minus x as return x. So you can do, for example. We have some variables, but a variable in Helm is just a function without a parameter. So just, and you can use it how you want. There is another way to declare function. You can use lambda expression. For example, my function equals, and you precise the argument, a and b, and a row, and then the body of the function. So we have some booleans, true, false. We have an array, but it's called a list in Elm. And you can see it's a type that takes another type as argument. It means it's a list of something the compiler doesn't know yet, but if we add an element in it, it will be a list of float. That means you can't use different values inside your list. But once again, Elm helps you, and it says, okay, we can't do that, but if you want to do it anyway, you can use union type. We will see that later. Okay. We have also some objects. For example, if you want to create a user, you can say, okay, login is login, password is, no, password is password. And you can say, see that it say, okay, it's a structure with one login that is a string and one password that is a string. You also have some tuples, which is a finite list of values of the type you want. For example, one float, one string, one string. Okay. In Elm, the type system is really powerful, so you can create your own types. There are two kinds of types. The first one is called type alias, and it is used to rename some of your structures. For example, you can say, okay, my user was this, so my user is a login that is a string, and the password that is a string. And Elm creates for you a function user that is used to create a user. You can say, okay, my user is jgrene, and my password is password. But let's be safe. Okay. The second kind of types is more useful. It's called union types. It's like an enum on steroids. It's like an enum where each member can receive 0 or more arguments. Let's take a simple example. Let's say you want to receive a string from the server. So in JavaScript, you will probably have one myString variable, which is null for now, one state variable, loading, for example, and one error variable that is null for now. This to only represent one value that comes from the server. In Elm, you will just create a union type like this. Type remote string, for example. This could be something that is not loaded, or maybe this could be something that is loading, sorry. Or maybe this could be something that is loaded and then it contains my string. Or it could be an error and contains an error code and an error string. So after that, you can say my string is not loaded, or you can say it's loaded with my string, or you can say it's an error with some data. So this is really nice. Do we have a null value? Let's try. No, no null. Undefined, maybe. No. In Elm, we don't have anything like undefined or null. In fact, we do have something which is called nothing. Great, they just renamed it. Not exactly, because if you have a look at the type of nothing, it's a maybe. In fact, a maybe is a union type, which could be either nothing or just something. For example, a string. It means when you want to have a nullable value, you have to declare it with a maybe, and the compiler knows about that. So each time you want to handle the value, you have to handle the case where it could be nothing. So that's why you can't have any runtime exception in Elm. Every case are handled by the compiler. So for the rest of the talk, I made a really small application, a head or tails game. So you just flip a coin and try to guess if it's heads or tails. So really simple. And you can start again. Right now, the application is just the first screen, and we need to add the other functionality. So let's have a look at the code. We have 3 important files. The first one is index.html. It's the start of the application. The only line that is important here is this one. We have a div that will contain all our application with an ID root. Okay. The second one is an index.js file. The only 2 lines important inside it are those ones. First, we are importing our Helm code or Helm module from the file, and then we are calling the embed function on the div we have just seen. So that's all. And the third file is our module, or Helm module. First thing you can notice is that in Helm, everything is inside modules. So here you declare the module main, saying that you want to expose everything. That's what the 2 dots means. Just after that, we are importing some other modules to help us do some HTML. And just behind, you can see something I will describe a bit later. But first, you can notice annotation for types. This is not mandatory, but if you use them, it's really nice because it's a living documentation, and the compiler can check whether you're right or not. And it helps a lot to think about what you're trying to do. So, okay. Let's go back to this big block of text. So we are declaring a program. A program is a web application. It comes from the HTML module. And it respects the Helm architecture. Once they started to make web application with Helm, they've discovered that they always use the same pattern, the same architecture. It looks a lot like Redux, and that's because Redux was inspired by the Helm architecture. So in the Helm architecture, it's a one-way data flow. You have a model that is the state of your application. The model is provided to a view function that will be responsible for generating the view. So some HTML. This HTML is an HTML message, meaning it can send some message of type MSG. It sends message to the Helm runtime, and the Helm runtime calls the update function with those messages and the current model. The update function is responsible for updating the state and returning the new state, modified. So in the code, you can see that when you create your program, you need 4 information. The first one is the initial model. So right here, you can see that it's a tuple with our model, something of type model, and a command. We will see what it is just after. The second thing is the view function we just talked about that takes only the model and returns HTML message. You can see how you do HTML with Helm. You just use Helm function, to generate it. The first argument is usually a list of attributes, and the second one is a list of children. This is a bit disturbing at first, but after you can use all the power of Helm, so it's really nice to construct templates with Helm. So the view function, we have the update function that takes a message, the model, and returns a new tuple with the model and the command. Here we are doing nothing, just returning the previous model. And we have the subscription. It's used to receive message from JavaScript, but we don't need it in this example. So now we need to add a new feature. So we need to add this screen. So let's add a new state inside our application. Right here, we can have a state with a game. Okay. Now we need to display the view for that. So right here, instead of just returning a start game button, we'll use something that is called case and is kind of like a switch in Elm, but that can do pattern matching. So this is a lot more powerful than a classic switch in Java or JavaScript. So let's say, in case my model is a no game, I will continue to do that. But if it's a game, this will be fast. This block is not important, so I'm just creating a paragraph and two buttons, one with the head, the other with tail. So now we have it, but our model is always a no game, so it won't be displayed. Let's try just to update our initial model to see if it works. No, this is not what I wanted to do. Excuse me. Okay. Let's just see our application. And as you can see, now we have the second screen. But this is not what we want to do, so let's go back with a no game. And now we need a way to go from a no game state to a game state. And that way, it's a message. So let's create a message and say, OK, flip a coin for me. Now, what we can do is saying, when you click on the start game button, flip a coin. So, onClick, flip coin. I need to import the onClick attribute from html.events right here. So, OK. Let's see that. It doesn't work. That's normal, because we're not changing the model inside the update function. So here, we will just create another case on the message and say, OK, if your message is a flip coin message, then our state is a game now. Let's try. This is working. Great. But what we want to do is generate a coin state. So let's create a coin state. Not sure it's a better name, but okay. It could be either heads or tails. You see, in JavaScript, you would have created, for example, a Boolean. Here, it's more close to what you want to represent, so it's nice. Okay, so here we want to generate a random coin state. But the fact is, in Elm, everything is pure. You can't generate something that is variable inside a function. What you have to do is create a command that will explain to the Elm runtime how to generate what you want to resave. So we need to create a generator of random coins. For that, we have a module that is called random, right here. And it contains the generator type. And we're just saying, OK, I want to generate a coin state. So let's create this. So we will first start by generating a Boolean, right here. And then we will transform this Boolean with a map function and a lambda, saying, OK, if my Boolean is true, I will return heads, else I will return tails. So we've created a Boolean and then mapping it into a coin state inside our generator. Here we're not really generating something, we're just explaining how to generate something. If you want to generate something, you have to send a command. So right here, we'll use random.generate to say, OK, I want to generate something with this generator. But we need to get the result. So we need the Elm runtime to wrap the message, the value inside the message. So we will create a new message right here, coin flip, which will contain a coin state. And we can pass it right here. OK, nice. Let's see if it works. Oh, we have an error inside the console. If you have a look, it says that in the case, we haven't covered every branches. And that's why you can't have a runtime error, because you are forced to handle every potential case inside your code. So let's do this. So here we need to handle the new message, which is coin flipped, and take one coin state as argument. And here we can say, okay, we have a game, and we don't need any command. So okay, here we can let the no game, but we need to store the coin state inside the model. So let's just say it takes a coin state as argument. As it takes an argument, now we need to declare it here, but the compiler will tell you that if you forget, right here. So let's do that. Okay, now it should compile. Perfect. Let's see how it is. Perfect. And if you have a look to the debug tool, I'm not sure it's readable, but I didn't succeed in trying to increase the size. So on the left, you have the list of messages in your application. You can click on them to go back in time and see the state of your application. And on the right, you have the state of the application at that moment. You can even import or export that for debug session or something like that. It's really powerful. Okay, so let's go back to our code. Now what we need to do is making these buttons work to get to the third screen, this one. So let's create the third state right here and say, okay, here we have a third state that is a result, and we have a parameter which is the game state. What is a game state? It is either a win or a loss. So once again, no Boolean, we are really close to what we want to represent. So now we have an error saying that we need to handle the case of the result type. So let's do that. Here we're creating the result view. So once again, a little snippet. You have a new structure here, which is the let-in. In the let block, you can declare some variables that you will use in the in block. So here we're declaring a variable result, which is, if it's a win, congratulations message. And then we just display it and display again the start game button. Okay, so we have our state. We can even test it if we want to. Okay, let's say our initial model is a result win. Okay, not a good application. Okay, as you can see, this is correct. And you can see it's really easy to test your components in every state because you just have to modify the state. Okay, let's try the loss. Okay, it works. Nice. So now, let's go back with a new game. We need to have some way for the player to make a bet on the coin. So once again, it's a feature. So let's just add a message right here and say it's a player bet with a coin state as argument. If you look at the compiler, once again, it will just say, okay, you forgot to cover these branches. So you can see when you develop, you just have to update one thing, add the message, add the view state, and you will just follow what the compilers say to you until it works. So it really helps you during the development. And for the refactoring, it's the same thing. You just have to update a little bit of your application, and you just follow the errors until it compiles. Okay, So we need to add, where am I? Okay, here we need to cover the third message, which is a player bet. Okay, and let's say, we will use a let block once again and say, okay, my result is if my model is equal to game and the bet of the player, we will have a win, else it's a loss. And you can use that in the in block and say, okay, now I have a result with my result and a command.none. And now we are handling this. We just need to trigger the message. So right here we will add two unclick. One that will send a head, a player bet head, and the other one that will send a player bet tails. Okay, does it compile? Yeah, so it should work. As you can see, it works. So this is all for this application. A few things left. Okay. I haven't talked about communicating with JavaScript. In Elm, you can do that with what is called port, which is a stream, basically a stream of events. So you have some ports to communicate from Elm to JavaScript, and some ports to communicate from JavaScript to Elm. You cannot communicate both ways inside a port. So here we have one port to communicate to JavaScript. So as you can see, you just use this function and give it a string, and it will return a command. So you address a command to the Elm runtime. And here we have a port to receive message from JavaScript. So we need to give it a function that will transform the string message into a message. So here, for example, how could I say that? Yeah. When you want to receive something from JavaScript, you will declare some subscription right here. The subscription is just saying, okay, take this port and map every message into this message, for example. So each time JavaScript will send us something, we will receive a received username from a local storage message that will contain some data, maybe from the JavaScript. On the JavaScript side, this is really simple. Remember the main.embed function we've used. We can get an object in return and use it to listen, to subscribe to the stream, or to send some data on another port. For the test, it's really simple because Elm really is the test, because everything is pure, so you don't have a lot of things to test. You just take your function and see if the return is exactly what you want. It's really easy to test the HTML because everything in Elm is Elm, so you can compare just the data structure and you can test the HTML easily. I can maybe show you the test I've done on the application. Okay. Okay. Here I have some tests. Okay, as you can see, made some tests to test this application. And you can see that I'm either testing the update function, saying, okay, I have this model, I have this message. What do you return? Here I test to send the player bet head on my model. And I should have a result win because my model is a game head, as you can see. So I can also test the HTML. For example, here I just test that the HTML contains this text. So this is really easy to test. You just need Elm test, which is the standard test library in Elm. You can also do some property-based testing with Helm Fuzz, if I remember. I haven't used it, but okay. And that's all. If you have some question, we have a few minutes left. Thank you. No question? Yes?
Do you use Helm in production at the moment?
I'm not using. I was using in production for a personal startup project, but the project just break down. But you have some companies that are using it from for 3 years, I think. I think about NoReading, for example. You can contact them. They are really eager to help and to respond. The community is really nice. You can find them on the Slack, and if you have a question, usually they will answer in like 2 minutes or less. Yes?
How do you scale up to a larger app?
So the question is, how do you scale up to a larger application? In fact, in Helm, it's pretty easy to scale up when you did two, because everything is pure, so you can just move things into other components easily, just copy and paste. And you have some example of architectures. I'm thinking notably about Robert Feldman created some application showing all the best practice for a big Helm application. You have some pattern on how to scale the Helm architecture for big size project. We can discuss it later if you want. Yes?
What about web components? Do you know if there is a way to make web components with Helm and to make it interact with other web components?
I'm not sure about that, so I can tell you later. I will search a little bit, but I think it should respect the standard behind the scene. Not sure, but the question was, does it work well with web components? Can you generate web components with Helm? Sorry. Yes?
How do you interact with backend?
In fact, this is one of the points I haven't talked about. When you're dealing with, for example, the JSON string, you have to, in a way, parse it with some elements. So you have to check your JSON, in fact. So when you receive a string, maybe your question is, how do you contact the server also?
Basically, once you have a server backend call, you have a side effect in some way.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how you do this in a pure environment.
Yeah, so it's exactly the same way I generated the random coin. Maybe I have an example on the website. You will address a command explaining that you want a request to a certain URL with some properties. And Helm will do the call and return you something of type result. Either it's a success, either it's an error. So let's have a look. Yeah. We should have, yeah. You have an HTTP module. Where is it? Yeah. So you can say http.send and display explaining your request to the Helm runtime, in fact. Is it good, or do you want? Okay. Another thing which is pretty cool, if you want to find some function and you don't know exactly how it could be called, for example, you want something that transforms a string into a list of string, you can directly search it on the Helm search website. And for example, you can have the split function thanks to the type signature. It's pretty fun. Yes? Yes, you can generate source maps and do the debug inside the browser directly. It's like TypeScript. Yes?
Does it have time traveling debug?
Sorry?
Time travel debug.
Yeah, you have. For example, on my application. Oh, this is not okay. Where it is here. You can go where, and you can go back in time, right here, and take back at that moment, and you can export your history and send it to somebody to replay it. If you want to generate a project, there is something like React App, which is very nice. This is what I use for this project. Right here. I will add some link on my slide if you want at the end of the talk. Okay. Thank you. Feel free to come and ask me if you want anything during the day. Thank you.